Kunal sir. Kunal sir. Kunal sir. आवाज जा रही है? कुणाल सर, कुणाल सर,
हेलो,
आवाज जा रहा है सर?
हाँ
ठीक है सर।
Test. Namaste.
Good evening, sir. This is Rakesh from Bhagalpur, Bihar, India.
Namaste. This is
Hello, namaste.
Matthew Swordloff. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to
How are
see
you?
you.
Yeah, sir. Nice to meet you, sir.
Same here.
So we have, after 5 minutes, we will start. We have, in Indian time, we have 6:22.
All right.
So after 5 minutes, sir, we will start.
Very good.
So we are delighted to hear you. We are so much excited with your presence and will be enriched with your words.
Well, thank you.
Welcome, sir.
I'm just gonna check screen sharing. Can you enable screen sharing for me?
Yes, sir, you are audible and visible to all of us. Just after few minutes, we will start.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all dignitaries, guests, and participants with great joy and immense exultation. I feel privileged to extend my warm welcome to all present here for the webinar. We feel honored to have with us the honorable guest of honor, Professor Dr. Matthew Sweldorf. Sir, you have made all of us proud from your presence, and we are very much delighted with your distinguished work in numerous capacities. You are one of the most celebrated foreign speaker, motivator, as well as facilitator, sir. Dr. Matthew, the man of distinct vision and a fountainhead of illuminating ideas and idol of knowledge and experience and inspiration to all of us. So welcome, sir, Dr. Matthew, with the management, on behalf of management and organizing committee of this very webinar. We all welcome you, sir. Now I would like to just introduce Dr. Matthew. Dr. Matthew Sweldorf is currently an adjunct professor at the State University of New York at New Paltz. He teaches in the Graduate School of Education in the Educational Leadership Program. His students are mid-career teachers who are moving into positions of a school leadership in the region. At the New Paltz, Dr. Sweldorf teaches course on educational leadership, curriculum development and adoption, and the role of the school principals. Dr. Matthew also teaches internationally through the International Graduate Program for Educators at Buffalo State College. In this role, he works with teachers on developing ways to enhance instructions using technology tools. Through this program, he has taught at the graduate level in India, Qatar, China, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Honduras, Mozambique, and Brazil. Matthew first visited India in 2013 as a Fulbright specialist, where he worked with students and teachers at Vishwabharati University. He has since visited India several times to teach and travel. Dr. Sheldroff earned his doctorate in instructional leadership at Western Connecticut State University and a master in education at the State University of New York at the New Paltz. He is a certified school district administrator and a school building administrator in New York State, a Google certified trainer and an educator, and serves as a consultant for the New York State Department of Education on teacher and administration certification standards. So I request Dr. Matthew to address with his remarkable inspirational words. So over to Professor Matthew.
Thank you so much for those kind words and that lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here today. I wanted to say especially thank you for attending this session. I know the regular conference session ended earlier this afternoon and you're making a special trip back, so I appreciate your being here. As you said, I work in New York State in the Educational Leadership Department. And you mentioned that I visited India in 2014, and that's a little bit of a hint to the title of this talk. So as you said, I was at Vishwabharati in Shantiniketan. And when I was there, I learned a lot about Rabindranath Tagore. And the title of this talk is Beyond the Parrot's Cage, How Technology Can Change Education While Nurturing Connection and Humanity. And I'm really, really happy to be here. And I want to just thank you all for your presence and your attention. Give me a second to start sharing. Okay. Before I start, can I just, I would love to make this a little bit interactive and just, I know there's just hear who's in the room there. Maybe you could just, maybe one person can introduce everyone, or you can just call out who you are and your role. The folks at TTCB, do you have, can someone there introduce the room? Dr. Kumar, are you in the same room as the TTCB?
Okay, Professor Matthew. So we have faculty members assembled in the room. I just request all the members to introduce yourself, as Professor Matthew would like to hear you from you all. So please introduce yourself. All the members, all the faculty members are requested to introduce yourself.
Or if that's going to be too,
Please give me 1 minute, sir.
you can, if you want to introduce people, that's fine too. We don't have to make it a big thing.
Myself, Dr. Vivek Kumar Das, Principal of the TTCB. Thank you.
Myself, Dr. Naz Bano.
Good evening, sir. This is Ritesh Kumar from TTCB. Good morning, sir. This is Murari Kumar from TTC Barari. Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Mr. Avdesh Kumar Dikshit, teacher of Hindi pedagogy, Teachers Training College, Barari, Bhagalpur, Bihar, India.
Yes. Samir Kumar Misra, it is Barari, assistant professor.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Prashant Ranjan Dutt, Department of Social Science. This is Harivansh Prasad Singh, Assistant Professor, Teachers Training College, Bhagalpur.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Babul Kumar Singh, Teachers Training College, Barari.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Mansi Mahi. Good evening, sir. I am Silpi Kumari. Good morning, sir. I am Sunaina Kumari, Teachers Training College, Barari.
Myself, Dr. Gitanjali.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Ayantika Bhardwaj, Assistant Professor, Teachers Training College, Barari, Bhagalpur.
Thank you all. So thank you, Professor Matthew. This is Rakesh, Dean Faculty of Education, Tilka Maji, Bhagalpur, University, Bhagalpur. So again, welcome you with your inspirational kind words.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, and thank you all for saying hi. Before I start, I just want to say thank you to the conference organizer. So Dr. Gupta, Vice Chancellor, special thank you for your support of this event. Dr. Kumar, I know you put a lot of time into organizing this and you're facilitating today, so I appreciate that. And all the coordinators at the Teachers Training College at Bhagalpur, thank you for organizing the whole event and especially for making it possible for me to attend today. And of course, special thank you to Professor Ashish Srivastava at Mahatma Gandhi Central University, who is my dear friend who I met on my first visit to India at Shantiniketan, who invited me as well. And he and I have a very special bond and connection through our time together, and I appreciate the invitation. I want to just, before I get into the content of the talk, say a few things about this particular moment in time. When I told many of my friends here that I was going to be speaking today, and they also know about my travel in India and my connection with Dr. Srivastava and his family, many of them asked, well, how is it there? How are things? And I want you to know that for many people here in the United States, India has a special place for us as the world's largest democracy. And especially right now, with all of the social unrest and the social justice movement happening here in the United States, we recognize that in some sense, the birthplace of civil disobedience and civil action and action for a better world is really India. And I want you to know that I and many, many of my friends and people I know are hoping only for the best for the nation. And I also want to say that as far as this talk, so obviously I live in America, I live in New York, and my research and my studies and my career is spent here. So my talk has that bias. I'm an American and I have the bias of an American. I hope that the information I share has some universal appeal, meaning that it really makes sense for what's happening in India in terms of education. But that's my goal. I also want to encourage you to use the chat feature at the end of the talk if you have questions or items for discussion. So, the story of the parrot's cage. So this is a story from your own Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore. And the story offers a useful parable for our topic today. It was written in 1918, but it is very, very relevant. And for those of you that are familiar with Tagore, you know that his writings and his teachings are very, very timeless, incredibly powerful and insightful for education and many, many areas of society. So I'm going to give you the very brief version of the story as it relates to the talk today. So the story of the parrot's cage, it's actually called The Parrot's Tale. It tells of an uneducated parrot and a great king. And the king became aware of the parrot and ordered his nephew to educate the bird. So the nephew built a cage for the bird to learn in and was paid well by the king. The nephew then hired scribes to copy all the great teachings and put them in the cage, and the scribes were paid well by the king. The nephew hired polishers to clean the cage and pundits to analyze the parrot's education, and all were paid well by the king. The king then heard that the parrot was being educated well and wanted to see for himself, so he set out with his entourage to see the parrot. When the king came to the parrot's cage, he saw the papers that the scribe had written stuffed into the parrot's mouth and stuffed into the cage. And he declared that the parrot was getting an excellent education, and he made sure that all of the experts were paid well. But as you can imagine, the parrot was not happy. The parrot was stuck in a cage. The parrot was being stuffed, literally, with teachings. He was sickly and tried to escape. So the nephew called the blacksmith, and the blacksmith came and built stronger bars, and the blacksmith was paid well. And the nephew decided, just to be sure, he would cut off the parrot's wings. Well, soon after, the bird died, and the king called the nephew to ask what had happened. How is the parrot? And the nephew said, his education is complete. And the king and all the experts were happy, and everyone was paid well. So I chose that story as a touchstone for this talk because of its universal message, and of course, because of the connection of the author to you all. And obviously, the story is a parable. It relays Tagore's ideas on education and what it means to be an expert. It relays ideas on class and money. It's a very, very powerful story, and it's full of many teachings. But the teaching that to me is most relevant here is this idea of the parrot's cage, and the parrot is our student, and the cage is our classroom. And in some sense, we as educators are all the experts. And the story led me to three essential questions. And for me, when I think about any topic like this, I use this idea of essential questions as a way to focus my own inquiry and address only the most relevant topics. And obviously, the topic of this conference, it's a big topic. the topic of technology-enabled teaching and learning is a huge topic, and I'm sure you know, because you've heard from other speakers, and so you're getting a lot of information. So the three essential questions that I came up with. Excuse me. So the three essential questions are, what are the cages that we have built for our students in modern education? So if we take that idea of the parrot in the cage, what is that? How does that relate to our idea of education? What cages are our students in? The second question is, how can technology support our students' liberation from these cages? So if the cage is our system of education and our schools and the way we teach and the way we teach teachers, how can technology change that? How can technology free our students from those restrictions? And the third question is, how can we nurture connection and humanity amongst our students? All too often we think of education as instilling facts and information, but we also need to remember that we're educating the whole person, and we want to think about how can we not lose sight of the humanity of our students? How can we ensure that they stay connected with each other and with their adults in their circles, and become good citizens in a democracy? So I'm going to dive into each of these three questions in a very linear fashion. That's just the way I organize things. So what are the cages? And I would suggest that in our system, we overemphasize analytical thinking. And I have a sense that this is true in India as well as in the United States, that when we think of education, we think of instilling facts, whether it's maths or English or history. We think of a very rational, analytical mindset, and that's what we deem to be education. And I would suggest that there is another way to look at that. We, and when I say we, I mean us as modern educators, have a lack of diversity in teaching strategies and use rote learning to excess. And this is true in the United States. I see this with my students. I see this in schools I visit. I see this in teachers I work with. We tend to, that we say here in the United States that teachers teach the way they were taught. Teachers teach the way they were taught. And what that means is that the system perpetuates itself. So if we have a teacher that is, all they do is lecture, when a student leaves that class and goes into teachers training college, that's what they think good teaching is. And we need to really present another idea, another way of teaching other than rote learning and lecture. There are many, many diverse strategies that I'm sure you're learning about there and teaching about there in your teachers training college. Ineffective use of technology tools. So oftentimes we take technology tools and we use them to do the same thing that we would do without them. And I'll give you an example. A teacher who, here anyway, I've seen teachers who hand out a lot of worksheets. So they hand out a piece of paper to the students and say, here, This is your work. Go sit quietly by yourself and do that work. Well, that's not a great strategy for many students. Many students need more interaction. They want to work in groups. They want to work collaboratively. That teacher might get 20 laptops in their classroom, and instead of handing out a piece of paper to every student, they hand out a laptop to every student and say, here, do this worksheet. It's just on a laptop though. It's still a worksheet. It's still not a diverse strategy. So that to me is an ineffective use of technology. And finally, and this is a really, really important one because it's so much of an issue right now with all that's happening in the world, in India, in the United States, with politics, with healthcare, with income inequality, with poverty, certainly with COVID, a lack of connection between the content that we're giving teachers and real world issues. Now, it's important for students to know history, of course. It's important for students to know geography and biology, but it's also really important that those areas be connected to what's happening in their world and what's important in their world. And that to me is one of the limitations that we have in modern education. So I would suggest that the effects of this paradigm are profound. Young people are bored, stressed, anxious, and depressed. And there's a lot of research that bears this out. And again, I told you at the beginning of this talk that my bias is as an American educator. So the research I'm referring to is based in America. I am curious if there's research, similar research in India. Perhaps some of you are aware of that. But what we're seeing here is it's pretty catastrophic what's happening now in education. And there's hope that things are changing. I think the pandemic has really shaken up so many aspects of society, including education. But because of that, because young people are bored, stressed, anxious, and depressed, they're acting out in ways that are really not helpful. They have extreme inattention, and there's a unique way this manifests in the United States. We have a system where, the Western model of medicine, where we treat symptoms, and a large number of young people are taking medication to help them focus and stay attentive in school, which of course is not really getting at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the cage that they're forced to sit in every day, not that they can't pay attention. Disengagement. Young people are disengaged from education. They engage in unhealthy coping strategies. So these might be harm to self, harm to others, excessive drug and alcohol use, risk-taking, all sorts of ways to sort of help them cope with the fact that they're in a cage. And the cage doesn't look like the parrot's cage, but it looks like a nice classroom with 4 walls and a computer, but it's still a cage. And I think they know that on some level. So some research that's been done here in the United States, Yale University conducted a survey about high school students, and they found that 75% are, when asked about their high school experience, they use negative words to describe their experience. And the top 3 words are bored, tired, and stressed. And that's certainly not an experience that we want our students to have. New York University examined high achieving high school students. So these are the students who are going on to the top universities, who are valedictorians, salutatorians, high scores, and they found that their stress levels are much, much higher, and they're dealing with chronic stress that is compounded and leading to mental health issues well into their adult life. And the Brookings Institute did a study that pointed out that students are so disengaged from school that it's having long-term effects on their career prospects because they don't see the relevance to the education they're getting. So I'm going to turn to the second essential question, which is how can technology support our students' liberation from these cages? And, you know, I'm sure you all know there, you're in a teacher's training college, and I'm sure you've taken courses and taught courses about technology use, and you know that it's a very powerful tool. And if used properly and if used well, it can have dramatic effects on the way our students learn. And as I said earlier, it can also just be an expensive substitute for a paper worksheet. So one thing the pandemic has taught us is that we can connect with each other regardless of where we are. Real world connection is now possible regardless of physical location, and the technology support this has even before the pandemic, in the last 10 years, it has advanced exponentially. And the technology that allows for video conferencing and remote learning is extremely reliable and robust. Of course, I recognize the limitations in a large rural country without that kind of internet infrastructure everywhere. But even over cell connections, technology now enables our students to connect in ways that they couldn't just 10 years ago. One benefit of this is that our students and our teachers can now access content area experts with limited tech overhead. We know as educators how important it is to differentiate instruction, and technology allows us to do that in a way that people cannot. And finally, one of the most important things that we know about young people is they like to be with other young people. They like to have their own groups, and this can be supported in a pretty profound way through technology. And I'll get into each of these 4 points in a little more detail in a moment. So you all know what an LMS is. I'm sure you've been using them for a year and a half. And one thing that we know is that LMSs have grown to be extremely sophisticated tools that allow us as educators to host online content in a way that, you know, I never, as an educator, I never say about technology, it's easy, because I know for some people it's hard. But I will say that the LMS tools that are developed now, such as Canvas, Blackboard, Google Classroom, Moodle, have gone to great lengths to simplify how they're used and managed. And those tools can allow us, and particularly in India, which again has a very different demographic and geography and tech infrastructure, it can allow us to connect students and to allow students to connect across time and space in a way that was not possible just a couple of years ago. And to take advantage of that is really to the benefit of our students. So one of the things that I alluded to earlier was this idea of making content relevant and connecting students with experts in the field is also now possible. So a student in a rural part of northern India could connect with a scientist or a business person in a large urban city in the South. And that's possible now with limited tech overhead. So that kind of software, those kind of collaboration software, really can make a difference in terms of supporting the education of our students and giving them access to experts that are in their field of study. Another sort of revolutionary advance is the idea of, I'm sure you're all familiar with cloud computing, which can do two things. It can provide access to advanced processing power and data sharing. So those cloud tools really can allow me as a student in a small rural school with a $100 laptop and a decent internet connection, can access a computer that costs 100 times that and has 100 times the power and 100 times the data storage. So if I need to do some advanced processing for programming, for science analysis, for math, I can access that using these new tools. And this also was just not possible 10 years ago. You all know how important differentiation is. When we differentiate our instruction, we always think about content, process, and product. And this is the Tomlinson model of differentiation. And that can be really challenging for a teacher in a classroom with 35 students on a hot day to differentiate for every student. And that's just a reality of being an educator. But one thing is that software does not get bored or lose patience. So if a student needs to have something repeated 10 times before they learn it, software will do that. And the student, all they need to do is click 10 times and they will get the same video or the same sheet or the same interactive application. Software doesn't get tired of repetitive tasks. Again, it's something that a great teacher could do, but it's hard. It's hard to repeat the same thing again and again and again for your students that need it. Another advancement in software now is that software can track progress and adjust dynamically as the student is learning. And what that means is, for example, there's specific reading and math software that can be used that does an entry assessment of a student. It determines where the student is in the curriculum. It will place the student in the path of the learning where it assesses the student needs to be. And then as the student moves through the software and learns new skills, the software is constantly reassessing the student's ability and adjusting dynamically where the student needs to be in the software learning path. And this is pretty profound because, again, we know as educators how difficult it can be to differentiate when you have a large class. And software programs can do a lot of that work for us. So as I said, for young people, one thing that's so important is connection with their peers. And we're seeing in the United States this to a great extent, and I know this is a global phenomenon as well, but we're seeing young people use online forums and private groups to connect with peers in a way that they couldn't in the past. And this is especially powerful for young people that have been traditionally marginalized due to caste, gender identity, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. people that have been sort of cast aside by society or ignored or devalued can now connect with their peers and be affirmed and have the dignity of their own lives and their own experiences validated. And this is a great win for them and a great boost for their mental health. And we've seen time and time again, young people who have access to these kinds of supports rise to national and international notoriety. I'm thinking of Malala, I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg, people like that who are able to get a forum and be validated using technology. So the third essential question is, how can we nurture connection and humanity amongst our students? So if we return to the idea of the cage, and our students are in a classroom, which in some sense is a cage, and technology can be used to help them, to free them from that cage, then the third question, which is quite important at this point in time, is how can we nurture connection and humanity? And we're in the midst, I don't have to tell you this, of a moment in time right now, unlike any other. It is, for many people, it has been 100 years since this sort of catastrophic change has rocked their nation. And young people are obviously, just like all of us, feeling that and feeling that deeply. So one thing that we're really, really reevaluating here in the United States in our education models is the effect of trauma on our young people. And the idea that we need to know how the brain functions to be good educators. And in a moment of international crisis like this, where people are literally living meal to meal, returning to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how important that was when he wrote his book, The Theory of Human Motivation, how important it was then and how important it is now. So when we talk about trauma, we need to understand this idea of trauma-informed instruction. And the word trauma is, it's a powerful word. And sometimes when people see the word trauma, they think, oh, that's only, has to do with train crashes and earthquakes and tsunamis. And that's not what this is. Trauma in this term can be living day to day, not knowing where your next meal is going to be. It can be watching one parent beat the other parent. It could be living in a home that doesn't protect you from the elements every day. It could be seeing someone trafficked. So there's many, many forms of trauma. And trauma-informed instruction is an awareness of the effect of trauma and how we can shape the way we teach and structure our schools. So the image on the right really makes this very concrete. And it shows the three domains of care when we talk about trauma-informed instructions. And the first one, and this is very closely linked to Maslow, is creating a safe environment. Really, and I know you all know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The first and foremost responsibility of us as educators is to have a safe school, in a safe classroom. Students need to come into a safe place every day when they come to be with us. Connected to the research I shared, building relationships and connectedness. So building relationships between adults and young people, building relationships between young people and their peers. Really, really important, because we know that relationships help us heal and relationships help us lead happy, fulfilling lives. And finally, the idea of supporting and teaching emotional regulation. So in many schools now, students are learning to name what they're feeling and to explore and to share how they're feeling and how it's interfering with their learning. There's ample brain research to explain how trauma affects the brain. And when we're talking about learning and education, we're talking a lot about the brain. So we know that the way the brain works is literally altered in times of stress and trauma. And that brain function can be limited based on the severity of trauma, and learning can become challenging. And in the image on the right, what we know is that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that we use most often in the classroom, will either shut down completely or slow down significantly when a young person is faced with trauma or insecurity or extreme anxiety or distress. We go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, where the body knows what it's doing. The body is taking care of us. The body knows that if I'm at risk of harm, it's not important if I learn my maths. What's more important is that I survive. So the part of the brain that is responsible for learning my maths will slow down or shut down, and the part of the brain that is responsible for my physical survival will take control. And Maslow is sort of the foundation of every education college. We all learned about Maslow when we were students. And I would argue that in some ways we forget. We expect students to just come to school and learn no matter what is happening at home, no matter what is happening in their communities. And again, this pandemic has taught us, I have seen this time and time again, that we can't forget how important those primary needs are. And I'm sure you've seen this with your adult students. I'm sure you've seen this with your own children. It's really, really hard to learn something new if you are worried about food and shelter. So when those primary needs are not met, it's really, our role as educators changes. During any crisis, the relationship between physiological safety needs and the ability to learn is magnified. And one way to minimize the negative effect of that is through relationship building. So relationship building between teachers and students is key in the best of times. In times of crisis like we're in right now, it's essential. It's the relationship between the teacher and the student that can make all the difference. So I'm going to close. I'm going to encourage you to use the chat or just unmute if you want to ask a question or raise a point for discussion. I know that's not the common practice there, but I invite you anyway. I'm going to share my contact info. If anybody wants to follow up, I encourage you to reach out to me by email. And again, I'm going to just say big thanks to Dr. Kumar and all the conference organizers, the patron, the dean, Dr. Srivastava. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I hope we can have a little bit of discussion and questions, but if that's not happening, that's okay. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Kumar.
So thank you, Professor Matthew, for your nice deliberation before us. You have transformed our mindset. Although we are in the mindset of 19th century with the expectation of 21st century with the help of process of 20th century. So technology can change this mindset, and with your motivational speech, all the participants are, they have changed their views, and you have, as per your instructions, that is trauma-informed instructions, and you have just started with a very nice story. How can educational system can be reformed with the help of technology that will help teachers, teacher educators, and learners to, with the help of technology, one can transform himself or herself with the expected views and targets. Sir, you have discussed about how technology can change education for evil, with a very nice story of Parrot's cage that represents the education system, and with the help of technological tools, you have focused on the idea that technology can make the learning distance at the zero level. We can access with the help of technology. You are addressing from USA, New York, and we are just listening you. We are hearing you from India. So with this help, with this use of technology, one can accelerate the rate of learning. So just with your questions that cover the three questions, you have from the three questions, you have covered all the aspects through which one can think beyond their scope and accelerate the learning centered system. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Matthew, for your nice deliberation, for the motivational speech. And I hope all the learners have, all the participants have developed their learning so far as the continuous professional development is concerned. So from your email, the participants are requested to just chat Professor Matthew if they have any query, and I request with kind regards that Professor Matthew will solve those queries. So thank you again. Namaskar. And
Namaskar.
okay.
Be well, everyone.
Okay. So in future also, I need your assistance. Just your encouraging words will reform us, will tarnish us, will facilitate us to think beyond the scope. So with kind regards, I thank you for your presence and nice deliberation. So thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. Be well, everyone.